The people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson. Orenthal James, also known as O.J. Simpson, was an American football star and an inspiration to many across the country. He had met and married Nicole Brown Simpson, and they had 2 children together. Nicole was a well-loved model and actress. But on the night of Sunday, June 12, 1994, sometime past 10 o'clock, something happened that still remains controversial today. Nicole's dog was found by a neighbor with blood on its paws and stomach. The concerned neighbor then discovered Nicole Brown Simpson and a young man dead in front of Nicole's condo. Nicole had been stabbed so violently she seemed to be decapitated. The other man, identified as Ronald Goldman, had been at her condo to return her sunglasses she left at a restaurant. He had been stabbed repeatedly, approximately 30 times. As investigators arrived at the scene, O.J. had been on a flight to Chicago that had taken off from Los Angeles at 11:45 that night. The next morning, investigators called O.J. and informed him of his wife's murder. O.J. raised suspicion, but he did not ask investigators why, how, or by who. But he got the next flight out back home to L.A. and was welcomed to his home turned into a crime scene. Police tape covered his front gate, and bloodstains on his driveway were marked. That day, O.J. was asked numerous questions by the LAPD. The interview wasn't perceived as any help to investigators. However, the LAPD had collected enough evidence from the crime scenes to prove that O.J. was guilty of murder, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. Robert Shapiro, the attorney Simpson hired, arranged for O.J. to turn himself in by 10 a.m. the morning after Nicole's funeral. However, O.J. didn't show up as told, so 4 officers went to his home. The officers and Shapiro both noticed that O.J. was gone on what is referred to, quote, as the run of his life. O.J. had left behind him what appeared to be a suicide letter. O.J. and his former football teammate, Al or A.C. Cowlings, had taken off in his newly made famous Ford Bronco and were spotted on the freeway, and soon handfuls of news officials, police cars, and people of the public pursued him through his steady chase. Tensions were high as the run was broadcasted on televisions all over the country. Shapiro and Robert Kardashian had even read O.J.'s farewell letter to the public. It was said that O.J. had a loaded gun, money, a passport, and a disguise in his vehicle. Americans all over the country pondered O.J.'s next move. However, he eventually arrived back at his home where he was arrested. He pleaded not guilty at the preliminary hearing.
O.J. Simpson is in the back of this vehicle. It has tinted windows. We're unable to see a clear picture of him, but the reports we've received off of the police scanners is that Mr. Simpson has a gun to his head and obviously is threatening suicide.
One of the most particular characteristics of O.J.'s case was its media coverage. However, O.J. had a team of the most well-known and successful lawyers in the country. It was known as the, quote, Dream Team, and it consisted of civil activist Johnny Cochran, famous attorneys Robert Shapiro, F. Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz, Sean Hawley, Carl E. Douglas, Jared Oleman, and Robert Kardashian, O.J.'s longtime friend. DNA evidence experts Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld were also hired on the case. O.J.'s lawyers themselves brought tremendous additional influence to the case. Standing against O.J. were District Attorneys Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. The case began with around 70 witnesses. The first set said that O.J. was motivated to kill. Examples included Nicole's close friends and family, and even a 911 dispatcher. While the Simpsons were married, they had many disputes that the witnesses claimed as possibly life-endangering for Nicole.
Wait a minute, what's your name? Nicole Simpson. Okay, is he the sportscaster or whatever? Yeah. Okay, wait a minute, we're sending the police. What is he doing? Is he threatening you?
I'm going nuts.
Okay, has he threatened you in any way, or is he just harassing you?
You're going to hear him in a minute. He's about to come in again.
Okay, just stay on the line.
I don't want to stay on the line. He's going to beat the shit.
The next set of witnesses supported that he had used his opportunity to kill. OJ's limo driver, Alan Park, for example, had testified that when he arrived to take OJ to his flight, nobody answered the door. Park claimed he then saw a dark, shadowy figure enter the home at around 11 o'clock p.m., right after the murder had taken place. Kato Kalin, OJ's house guest, also claimed that he had heard thumps at the same time Alan Park had claimed to see a figure enter OJ's home. Aside from witnesses, prosecutors Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden had a considerable amount of evidence to convict OJ. They related the evidence from OJ's home to the crime scene. The numbers seemed impossibly disprovable. The blood found at the murder scene was only a match to 1 in 170 million people, and one match was OJ. Additionally, only 1 out of 6.8 billion people could have matched the blood found on the socks in OJ's room, and one was Nicole. Bloody footprints also matched a size 12 that OJ wore. A small amount of blood was found on the handle of OJ's famous Ford Bronco, smeared on the console, the door, the steering wheel, and the floor. The DNA showed a match to a combination of the victim's blood and OJ's. A pair of bloody gloves were also found at the scene and another at OJ's house, where Kato, the house guest, had heard thumps. The blood found on the glove at OJ's house was DNA matched to Simpson's and the victim's. The infamous Dream Team had a lot to go up against, but they were prepared to do so. Mark Furman, who had been the officer who had discovered the bloody gloves, was interrogated by OJ's lawyers. They asked him if he had ever used the N-word, and under oath he claimed he had not. However, Furman had used it many times. An aspiring screenwriter had hired him for an interview on police problems, and in the tape recordings of the interview, Furman used racially degrading slurs, including the N-word, spoke out against interracial marriage, and spoke of planting evidence to guarantee an individual was convicted. These tapes would furthermore support the theory that Furman had something to do with framing OJ, since he had been the one to find the gloves. OJ's lawyer, Johnny Cochran, had done a good job putting a so-called race card in attempts for OJ's support. He labeled the LAPD as racist with the help of Furman and gained the support from the minority population of Los Angeles.
Did you plant or manufacture any evidence in this case?
I assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
Simpson's defense was reinforced when prosecutor Christopher Darden, who was confident in the gloves fitting OJ, asked OJ to try on the gloves that were found as evidence in court. The jury watched as the gloves were squeezed on. They did not appear to fit OJ. His defense team then fired the phrase, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." OJ's defense team also saw strategy in attacking the prosecutor's evidence. Forensic expert Henry Lee raised doubts with blood and DNA tests, claiming that they were performed with flaw and that there was room for error. Lee made room for the jury to create reasonable doubt. The trial itself lasted almost a year. However, the jury had reached a decision in 4 hours that O.J. Simpson was not guilty of the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. Half of America was devastated in hopes to raise awareness for domestic violence, and the other half celebrated. It is crucial to know the conditions of society at this period of time. O.J.'s accusation was not too long after the famous 1992 Los Angeles riots, or Rodney King riots, that had resulted from 4 white LAPD officers beating African-American Rodney King. O.J.'s case had brought thin ice for the LAPD, who feared for another fall of the city of L.A. This fear of falling into riot and the boiling of anger of African Americans with police could have translated into the outcome of O.J. Simpson's verdict. The jury was composed of 10 women and 2 men, of which 9 were black, 1 Hispanic, and 2 whites. The jury was selected from a downtown selection and feared that an all-white Santa Monica selection would cause uproar. The case itself was reflective of the different racial attitudes towards law enforcement today. An important factor in keeping the jury selection fair was the control established upon them. They were screened extensively, and they were not allowed to access any forms of media. The case was covered in almost any form of media, even in the courtroom, and the judge had hoped to keep the game as fair as possible. However, OJ didn't get far from walking free. He was involved in a civil trial in Santa Monica where he was ordered to pay $1 million compensation for his alleged murders. And also, in 2007, he ordered a gunpoint robbery of sports memorabilia in Vegas. The jury convicted him of guilty, and he is currently serving his 30-year term in Nevada. He will be eligible for parole this year.